Welcome into the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. Round one of the Fantasy Football Playoffs are here, and we're giving you our Week 15 best and worst players to start this week. And Dave, we're going to keep doing this new fun style that we've got here, where we're not just going to be going through, all the guys that we just want to start position by position. What we're actually going to do is we take these different categories that we've made up here. The best risk reward start, which can be a running back or a wide receiver. The best matchup of the week for, those players that sometimes you get too cute. You talk yourself out of it and you're like, no, I absolutely need to start these guys. They can win me my matchup. Then the player that we will not start, even if there's a fire. And then lastly, our favorite streamer, which I don't know how many of those are going to be in the playoffs, but we got to give the people a little bit of everything. There's all different styles and flavors out there, Dave.
Yeah, no, this is fun to talk about. I really like this. It forces me to think a little bit harder. Typically, what I was doing for the show when we talk about our starts of the week
Not
is,
thinking at all.
yeah, I would just pull up my rankings and I'd pull up the consensus rankings, and that was it. I would just look at who I like more than consensus and talk about those guys. This forces me to think a little bit more. So, kudos to you, Alfredo, for making me think on a Thursday morning.
Well, I'm glad we can get you to think on the Fantasy Football Show. That's really important. I'm glad that we can bring this to our listeners and our viewers, our thoughts. And if you want a little bit more of these thoughts, just take a second, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify. If you're watching the video, give it a little thumbs up, smash the like button, comment down below with your start sit questions. We're going to do our best to get back to you. So, Dave, why don't you kick us off here? We are going to start with the risk reward start of the week. This can be a running back or a wide receiver.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Amari Cooper, and this is weird. Like, I don't know what to make of Amari Cooper in Buffalo. Hasn't really done much of anything at all. And then last week he saw 14 targets, and it's like he's suddenly the wide receiver one. And now they've got a matchup against Detroit in Detroit that has a very high over/under. It should be a just smash matchup for every Lion and Bills player. But Keon Coleman should be coming back. And Dalton Kincaid should be coming back as well. And we saw this huge blow-up game from Amari Cooper last week, and I think this is the perfect kind of risk-reward guy. Obviously you've got the Marquez Valdes-Scantlings and the Nick Westbrook-Ikines and the Quentin Johnsons, were these guys that are risk-reward in the fact that they could always score on a big touchdown. But Amari Cooper, the reward is that he maintains the type of target total that we saw last week. He's 14-plus targets in a matchup, and the risk is obviously that he falls kind of by the wayside again, and Kluge the guy, and Dalton Kincaid gets his, and Keon Coleman gets his, and Amari Cooper finishes the game with 4 targets, 3 receptions, and 18 yards. So I think there's a lot of risk reward guys, but I don't know if any have the ceiling that Amari Cooper could have if he's able to maintain the target total that he saw from last week.
I mean, this is kind of what we've looked at with every single Bills pass catcher here. But even from early in the season, prior to the season, there was always the risk reward. We saw it with Dalton Kincaid. We've been, seeing that with Khalil Shakir. But the whole thing with him was that the risk was so low when you draft a player like that. And he's just kind of been giving us reward after reward after reward. And I think a lot of people were hoping that we could get that upside with a Keon Coleman. And now with Amari Cooper, I would have a really hard time starting him. I would have a really hard time starting him this week, but that's just me. I am a scaredy cat, especially when it comes to the playoffs. Like, I don't know, man. Like this one's tough for me. I'm more willing to bench a star player that has disappointed throughout the season than I am to take a chance on him this week.
I mean, you're more likely to bench. Sorry, I misunderstood that. I was going to say, Amari Cooper is a star player who's disappointed. Like,
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And I mean, I've got him low in my rankings too. Like, Amari Cooper's my wide receiver 40 this week. So I'm not saying like you need to get him in your lineup. We're talking about risk reward, and there's risk and reward with Amari Cooper. So I kind of have this clump of guys that's kind of my fall off point this week, where it's like, if you're starting anybody below this tier, you're in trouble. And these are the guys that I think are like the real risk reward guys, the guys that can score the big plays but aren't going to have the target total. Xavier Worthy, Nick Westbrook-Ikine, Quentin Johnson, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Rashad Bateman. I think that's like the real boomer bust here. I've got Amari Cooper a few spots ahead of those guys because I think that his floor is a little bit safer and his ceiling is higher if he's able to maintain. I mean, none of those guys that I talked about in that tier are ever pulling 14 targets in a game. The fact that we just saw that from Amari Cooper last week means that he's got a pretty high ceiling, albeit a very risky floor.
Yeah, I've got Amari Cooper right now as my wide receiver 45, so he's just kind of in that maybe wide receiver 3, flex range, depending on your rosters. So I get it. I get it. If you have to start him, he presents that upside.
And
I'm
also,
gonna,
I'll say, like, a lot of
yeah,
people won't be able to relate to this, but you and I do rankings, and it's a trip doing rankings when there's no bye weeks, right? Like, you think about a guy like Amari Cooper, and you're like, "Oh, yeah, he should be like a good high-end wide receiver 3," and then you actually start fleshing out the rankings, and you're like, I can't get him inside my top 40," and that's just kinda what happens when no players are on bye. Suddenly, a lot of these guys that we're looking at is wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3s and RB2s are suddenly out of starting territory.
yeah, it's kind of crazy. I'm looking at my rankings right now, and that actually brings me to my guy that I'm going to put as the risk reward wide receiver for this week, and it's Josh Downs, wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts, who when he was healthy and out on the field, he was great. Prior to his injury, double digit fantasy points in 7 of 8 games. He was a top 20 wide receiver in 6 of those games. Like, this was a guy that, I mean, if you drafted him and you got him at that excellent draft cost, you were feeling like you were going to win your league. All of a sudden, the injury comes into play. You have Anthony Richardson getting benched, and Joe Flacco comes in, and then Joe Flacco is benched, and Anthony Richardson is back, and then the Colts have their struggles, their ups and their downs, and now here you are. It's his first week back. You're in the middle of the playoffs. They're going up against the Denver Broncos secondary, which is also surprisingly very boomer bust. We just saw Jerry Jeudy torch the Broncos. One thing I will point out,
Jerry Judy's been torching everybody. Woo.
Yeah. I mean, it was a
Yeah,
little different with that one. It was kind of unexpected, especially with Pat Surtain there, who I
Surtain, yeah.
figure is
Like
going to.
like putting Surtain on the ground with his route running, like, it was what happened to Jerry Jeudy? Sorry, totally off the rails here. Keep going,
No,
calm
no,
down.
you're good. You're good. So, like, I do expect Pat Surtain Jr. to be on Michael Pittman Jr. like heavily in this one because Josh Downs does move around so much because Josh Downs will be working out of the slot. And something where I say that Jerry Jeudy and Josh Downs kind of align is that they're both good zone beaters, and that's something Jerry Jeudy. I mean, I think he's been maybe inappropriately or incorrectly lauded as a man beater and like he's a really incredible route runner when really what he's good at is he's good at finding space. And that's what Josh Downs does really well. And if there's a formula to beat the Denver Broncos through the air, which they'll probably have to do, the Colts, uh, Josh Downs gives them that little skeleton key to success for the offense. So yeah, I see him as a big time risk reward player. And Dave, I've got him just barely ahead of where we were talking about Amari Cooper. I've got Josh Downs as my wide receiver 40 this week, where he's same thing, a fringe wide receiver 3 at best.
I've got Josh Downs at wide receiver 39, so I have him one spot ahead of Amari Cooper in my rankings. And again, trying to encompass the upside and the downside with these players is really tough in a set of linear rankings
Yeah.
like we talk about all the time. But I have Josh Downs well ahead of Michael Pittman.
Mhm.
And we know the upside is there. Like we've seen Josh Downs' best and worst games of the year have come with Anthony Richardson. So you know that you're getting a really high floor, or I'm sorry, a really high ceiling with Josh Downs, but the floor is shaky. And that's just living and dying by Anthony Richardson. That's what the Colts are doing right now, and that's what anyone rostering Mike Josh Downs is doing as well.
Just a bonus player that neither of us have on this list, but Michael Pittman, I'm not starting him anywhere. I have
No,
him in one of my rosters. I mean, one of the rosters I have him on has a round one bye, but any of my rosters where I have him, which I think is like 3 out of the 21, I'm not starting him.
yeah,
I'm
I
not
think it's just
starting.
the injury, that back injury. I think is just going to continue plaguing him all year. Like hope that he can come back next year and look a little bit healthier. But the production taking a backseat to Josh Downs, the back injury, Pat Surtain covering him in this matchup.
So many bad.
Um, I mean, again, I know we did the players to drop to sabotage your league weights a couple weeks ago. But Michael Pittman, man, if he's on my roster, I'd have no qualms about dropping him and hoping my opponent picks him up.
I was going to drop him, and then I just kept looking around the waiver wire, and it's just so bad that I was like, I can't justify this. I'll hold on to him just in case, Josh Downs isn't quite ready in future weeks. Let's go to our next one on here, Dave. Let's be actually a little more surefire about this, a little positive. Let's take a look at the players that have the best matchup of the week. And like we said, this can be any position in fantasy football. So why don't you kick us off?
Joe Mixon, great matchup. He's playing at home. We've seen him play much better at home than he has on the road. Alfredo, I don't know if you know this, but the
Yeah.
Miami Dolphins aren't very good this year. I don't know if you're aware. Um,
You shut your dirty mouth. Okay. The Miami Dolphins. Never mind. Just go. Just go.
yeah, and I mean that's really what it comes down to. Texans are big favorites in this game. If you look, the Miami Dolphins actually haven't been terrible in points allowed to fantasy running backs. But a lot of that is just coming from the fact that they haven't been scoring touchdowns. Over the last 4 weeks, they've only allowed 2 touchdowns to running backs. Joe Mixon is a touchdown scoring machine, especially when they're playing in Houston. They're favorites in this matchup. So if they end up with a lead, I think this is one of those matchups where we can see Joe Mixon getting 30 plus touches, finding the end zone multiple times. I mean, you're starting Joe Mixon regardless, but I've got him as my RB2 on the week behind only Saquon Barkley.
I'd be expecting a lot of dump offs to Joe Mixon in the flats.
Yeah.
That's just something that the Dolphins have been weak against, regardless of defensive coordinator, regardless of defensive personnel. It has been one of their kryptonites for years and years and years. They're really good at, they're one of the best at applying pressure, but actually getting sacks. And
Mhm.
last week we saw Aaron Rodgers on a bad Achilles and at 73 years old, kind of tear them apart. Jalen Ramsey just looks bad. He looks cooked. The secondary itself looks cooked. So I do think this could be a get right game for the Houston Texans. And as good as Tua has been, you're right, Dave. The Dolphins suck. Sorry, I needed that. I needed the therapy. I needed the vent. Joe Mixon, phenomenal. Honestly, a lot of the Texans, like I'm willing to start Tank Dell this week as well. Like this could be a good game for the Houston Texans.
I almost talked about Tank Dell as my high risk, high reward guy. And I feel like we're talking about all the same guys that are kind of like
Yeah.
lumped together. Josh Downs, Amari Cooper, Tank Dell. I've got them all ahead of that kind of fall off tier that I talked about with Nick Westbrook-Akine and Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Xavier Worthy and those guys. But I have literally back to back to back in my rankings. It's Josh Downs, Amari Cooper, and Tank Dell. All risky plays, but fortune often favors the bold, and they have big upside in these matchups.
You're very well read. Fortune favors the bold. All right, I'll give you my best matchup here, and this one, it's another one where I know these players seem obvious, but we do tend to do this where we get to the end of the year and we try to be cute and we look at what are the projections in my fantasy app, or this guy could really bust out for a bunch of points, and let's just keep it simple. Rico Dowdle, running back for the Dallas Cowboys, going up against the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers remain the best matchup for fantasy running backs, giving up the most fantasy points, and Dowdle's been great, like not just good. He's been phenomenal over the last 3 weeks here. He's getting an RB1 workload, 3 straight games of at least 19 touches, back-to-back games with 110 plus rushing yards. And since Cooper Rush took over in Dallas, Dave, they went from being one of the least run heavy teams at 29th in rushing play percentage all the way up to 13th in the NFL over the last 3 weeks here. Rico Dowdle has become their full offense. It's Dowdle and it's Lamb. And then Dowdle has been the running back 9 in fantasy over these last few weeks, running back 12 in fantasy points per game. He's just kind of a certified RB1 at this point. And if you have him and you're in the playoffs, I have absolutely no qualms with starting him. And I'm just going to keep starting him every single week without a second guess here.
Yeah, and as we talked about, like the biggest indicator of having a smash week is playing against me in my home league, and my opponent this week is starting Rico Dowdle, so put him down for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns.
I've got Rico Dowdle starting in the listener league this
Yeah,
week.
he's looked good. I mean, I was a big Rico Dowdle. I don't want to say hater, but I'm a hater sometimes, and I didn't like what I saw from Rico Dowdle last year, and I was very anti drafting Rico Dowdle this year. You remember, I was on the Zeke train. I still thought Zeke had something
Mhm.
left in the tank, and that man is just a bag of dust at this point. And Dowdle has looked
So
pretty
glad you
darn
said
good.
dust. So glad you said dust. I was like, "Oh, is he gonna do it?"
No, Dowdle's looked good over the last few weeks, though. He's got
Yeah.
burst, gets involved in the passing game, and has a nice matchup here. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, team downtown 333 Brown, you're going down this week. Just wanna let you know. Listen, really, you're losing. All right, let's go to the next category on here. These are the players that we will not start, not even if there's a fire. Dave, start us off.
Najee Harris, man, I can't do it, and I know a lot of people probably got to the playoffs with Najee Harris because he's been steady this year. I mean, he's given you like 10 to 12 points almost every single week, but we saw that workload really kind of diminish last week. Jalen Warren carved out a bigger chunk of the backfield than we have seen all season. Took him some time, man. He was dealing with some injuries and took him some time to get up to speed, but he is up to speed now, and that is coming at the expense of Najee Harris. You look at the matchup that they have this week going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, a very good run defense. So Najee Harris, cooling off, losing workload, and going off against a really good opponent this week. I am very low on Najee Harris, and I know a lot of people probably are looking at their lineup saying, "Well, I've got to start Najee Harris," but I've got a lot of names ranked ahead of him that, might still be on the waiver wire. Tank Bigsby, Sincere McCormick. These guys aren't on the waiver wire, but Ramondre Stevenson, Rashad White, Isaiah Pacheco. I've got Najee Harris all the way down at RB 28 this week.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I've got him at running back 29 this week going up against Philly. Other guys that I've got ahead of him, Dave, Rashad White, I think you might have said him, but Patrick Taylor, if he ends up getting the start for San Francisco, Isaiah Davis, Braylon Allen, both of the Jets running backs I have ahead of Najee Harris, Ramondre Stevenson even going up against the Arizona Cardinals here, and Isaiah Pacheco also coming off of his injury. Like it seems like Najee's he's like a de facto start. He's like the guy you plug in your lineup and you don't feel good about it. So I'd rather just take the guys that I'm going to feel good about putting in my lineup, even if it just offers a little bit more upside.
Yep.
Why not? All right, my guy here for the player I will not start, even if there's a fire. Jayden Reed, wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. Not cool, bro. Not cool.
Yeah.
I will always remember this. Last week, you gave us a 0 going up against the Seattle Seahawks. And honestly, what's your problem, man? Because the week before that, you go and you crush my Miami Dolphins and you get like your one good game that you've had in the last month. And now let's just take a look at it, Dave. 12 total targets over the last 4 games. The one good game he had was totally predicated on scoring a touchdown. Now, Christian Watson seems to be like he's coming along here towards the end of the year. Even though Dontavian Wicks hasn't been super productive, he's getting targeted. Romeo Doubs looks like he could be coming back off of his concussion. Jayden Reed, it's just been so disappointing. He's had the third fewest points. Excuse me, the Seattle Seahawks, have had the third fewest points allowed to wide receivers over the last 5 weeks. So you've got a guy who's been disappointing over the last month, going up against a team that's been really good against wide receivers over the last month. And honestly, I just can't do it. I can't do it where I plug in a guy based on the name and he gives me a single digit game. It's not worth it at this point. And I think that becomes the toughest part of this time of year. It's the intangible part of fantasy where you have to be willing to bench guys that you drafted highly at the beginning of the year. You have to be willing to bench guys that were seen as fantasy stars, maybe the first 6 weeks of the season. But if they've just been bad now, ride the hot hand. I'm going Adam Thielen over Jayden Reed. Like I'm going a bunch of different wide receivers over Jayden Reed. I'm willing to bench him. And honestly, I don't want to start him no matter what.
Yeah, I've got him down at wide receiver 30 on the week, and he's another guy. I think we could have easily talked about Jayden Reed as a high risk, high reward guy. The guy that we talked about in the first segment, because that he is just a baller. I mean, like I could just boil it down to that. Like you get the ball,
He's good.
he
He's
can
very
always
good.
rip off a huge play, but the usage has been very disappointing.
Like Dave, I'll just actually go through the list here. The guys I have ahead of him that I would start: Roma Dunze, Tank Dell, Josh Downs, Devontae Smith, DeAndre Hopkins, Jamison Williams. Even though he's been disappointing, Marvin Harrison Jr., I think the upside's a little bit better there. Debo Samuel, Darnell Mooney, Khalil Shakir, Jalen Waddle, DJ Moore. Like I can just keep going. But I think you get the picture. I have zero trust in Jayden Reed this week.
So I'm a little bit higher on him than you are this week. I've got Jayden Reed ahead of a lot of those guys. But I do feel some vindication because I was very anti Jayden Reed at his draft costs. And
Yeah.
week 1, he blows up for 100 plus yards and 2 touchdowns. And I was like, well, I really screwed up this one. But now we see the other guys getting more involved. And Jordan Love, maybe on fraud alert. Maybe not the guy that we
Oh,
thought he was.
you can't fraud alert a guy after how much he's done. I feel like 6 weeks ago you were saying, the Packers, man. I don't know why I
this is
turned
the same
you
thing we
into
did last year. Like, it was a tale of 3 seasons for Jordan Love. Like, started off the season on a blistering pace and then was ice cold for the middle of the season and then finished hot. And this year we saw him start out hot and now he's starting to cool off again. I don't know, man. He's fun to watch. I mean, I will never knock a gunslinging quarterback, and that's certainly what he is. But seems like the luck has definitely been starting to wear off a little bit.
You really could have said the love is running out.
Yeah, I know.
What are you doing?
I missed the
Low
point.
hanging
I'm
fruit.
sorry.
Low hanging fruit. All right, let's go to our favorite streamers. These are going to be quarterbacks or tight ends. So, Dave, start us off.
Jameis Winston's still available in a lot of leagues, and the interceptions are bad for real life football. But whether you throw a pick or a pick six, it doesn't make much of a difference in fantasy. And when you're throwing for 300-400 yards and multiple touchdowns, that's going to offset the interceptions and the laughable moments that Jameis Winston has on the field. And now he gets a home game against Kansas City. Kansas City's going to blitz him heavily, so we could look at some poor decision making here if they really get into his head. But also, when teams are blitzing heavy, that opens up the opportunity for big plays. And we've seen Jerry Jeudy consistently getting behind defenses all year. Cedric Tillman's back in this lineup as well. I don't think any team has had an answer for David Njoku. Elijah Moore is starting to look good over these last few weeks. So Jameis Winston's still available in a lot of leagues. I can't imagine a lot of people are looking for streamers at this point. Like if you got to the playoffs, you probably have the quarterback and tight end that you want to rely on, in week 15. But if for whatever reason, you're sitting there looking at your lineup and you've been streaming all season, and I don't know, maybe you're looking at Drake May, who doesn't have the best matchup and has been cooling off a little bit, or Matthew Stafford, who's got a tough matchup, and you want to look at Jameis Winston instead. I do have him ahead of both of those guys this week.
Yeah, this is why I said like we kind of just need to do all flavors for everybody because there could be some people that just squeak into the playoffs and they're like, man, I've just been streaming quarterbacks every week, and they've got guys like Jameis and Bryce Young and just a bunch of randos and just throw them in there at quarterback each week in a revolving door. And Dave, I think the same thing can be said at tight end really this year, especially with how bad it ended up being. So I'm going to give you my guy. It's Zach Ertz for the Washington Commanders. And he's not as readily available as Jameis is off of waivers, but he's still available in roughly 40% of leagues, or maybe you already have him and you've been streaming him and you're trying to figure out who to stream this week at tight end. Zach Ertz going up against New Orleans Saints is a pretty good matchup, and I've actually got him ranked as a top 12 tight end this week, so he's an easy streamer for me. It's looking like Noah Brown is going to be out for the Washington Commanders this week, so that's going to pump Zach Ertz up immediately to the number 2 target on the team. There's no Austin Eckler, so those are more targets that are available for Zach Ertz. And the Saints, it's a good matchup. This could also honestly be thrown into the risk reward because the Commanders could get up early so big against the Saints that they could just rest a bunch of starters like halfway through the game. This is another one of those games where the defense is really bad for the Saints and they're missing their starting quarterback. So we could be looking at a lot of Jake Haener, Spencer Rattler, maybe a mix of both. There's no Taysom Hill to save you now. So the game can get crazy out of control, but the Saints are allowing an average of 11.5 PPR points per game to tight ends over the last 7 weeks. So if I need double-digit fantasy points from a tight end, and I'm wondering who I need to start, I'm putting Zach Ertz in there. He's the number 2 target this week for Jayden Daniels against a bad defense. And even if the game kind of does end early, so to speak, I'm assuming we're going to get some pretty good production from Zach Ertz early in this game. Ever since trading Marshawn Lattimore, Dave, the Saints have just been awful.
Yeah. Alfredo, you know how much I like to brag on myself. It's no secret to anybody who watches the show. Zach Ertz in preseason draft rankings this year was the consensus tight end 29. I mean, he was going undrafted in almost every single draft. I'm looking right now on Fantasy Pros, and, we have our rankings published there. I had him as tight end 15. I was 16 spots ahead of
Wow.
consensus. You know, Cliff Kingsbury loves Zach Ertz. Like, we have to remember, we look back 2 years ago, Trey McBride and Zach Ertz were on the same team, and Cliff Kingsbury said, yeah, Zach Ertz is the guy that we need to get touches here. Like, it took an injury to Zach Ertz to even get Trey McBride on the field in Arizona, and now we're seeing the same thing with Ben Sinnott, a guy that I was kind of hyped about early in the offseason, and then as reports started to come out about Zach Ertz, I said, oh, well, it's happening all over again, and Zach Ertz, he's just been a touchdown machine. He's going to continue getting opportunities. Yeah, he's an easy start this week. I got him inside my top 12.
Yeah, look at you. I just pulled it up. Dave Kluge, football guys, tight end 17 for Zach Ertz. You were 16 spots above consensus on that.
Yeah.
Look at you. That's
If
why.
Taysom Hill stayed healthy, I'd be the number 1 tight end ranker on the year and still might sneak in. Like, Taysom Hill is still, I think, even having missed like over half of the season, I think he's still a top 10 tight end in scoring.
Yeah, man, tight end. What a bleep fest that is. All right, let's go to
Speaking of
the
Kyle Pitts, man, I was on Harris football
yeah.
show earlier today. We talked about Kyle Pitts. We both have him outside of our top 20 on the week.
You can't start Kyle Pitts. You can't.
You drop him. Like, you can't
Yeah,
even
I don't
roster
think
him at this
I
point.
was gonna say I don't think anyone has Kyle Pitts at this point. Like if you're in the playoffs, I don't think you have him on your roster. If you
Yeah.
do, you're not starting him. If you do have him on your roster, just drop him. Go and get some other high upside players that you might have at different positions.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Yeah.
that's where we're at. All right, Dave. Let's go to the listener questions here,
Let's do it.
and let's kick this off. The first one is from Justin. What's up, J Bones? J Dog. Dave, you got a nickname for Justin? Anything else?
Nothing coming to my mind. Sorry, I'm looking at my
Boo! I
rankings
put
right
you on the
now.
spot. Yeah. All right. So Justin asks, "Hey guys, big fan. Missed you guys yesterday. We did not record for a Wednesday show. We missed you too, Justin." He says, "I need to pick one in my PPR league: Jalen Warren, Tank Bigsby, Sincere McCormick. Currently an underdog in my playoff matchup by 8 points in the projections." Where are you going,
I,
Dave?
I have Sincere McCormick one spot ahead of Tank Bigsby, so I'd lean Sincere McCormick, but wouldn't blame anybody for going Bigsby.
I'm going Sincere McCormick here. I've got him. Let me see how many spots ahead of these guys. Yeah, I've got Sincere McCormick about 7 spots ahead of Tank Bigsby.
Yeah, and
I
last week was a weird matchup where the Jags were in the lead, and kind of controlling the game against Tennessee, and I think that's why we saw a lot of Tank Bigsby, but Travis Etienne was still coming in for passing down work, so it's kinda tough to get, a read on what this situation is gonna look like, but you see him playing up against the Jets, they could take a lead again and lean heavily on Tank Bigsby, but if for whatever reason they fall behind, then I worry that Tank Bigsby spends a little bit more time in the bench. We see ETN in there for passing downs, where I think Sincere McCormick, as wild as this sounds, I think is just kind of matchup proof. They're going to give him carries, they're going to give him targets. If they get anywhere near the end zone, they're going to give him those touches as well. So I think, you know, Tank Bigsby could potentially get phased out of the game if the game script doesn't go in his favor. Sincere McCormick is guaranteed some sort of volume.
Yeah, I'm all in there. Sincere McCormick. All right, next question on here. This is from Wah on Twitter. Great name. Great name. He asks, or she asks, they ask, who do I bench out of the below players? Right now, it looks like I'm benching Lad McConkey in half PPR. So they listed Rico Dowdle, Jonathan Taylor, Tyreek Hill, Terry McLaurin, Alvin Kamara, Cooper Kupp, Lad McConkey. So Dave, who are you benching out of that group?
I'm benching Lad as well, but don't really feel too good about it. I'm also saying I'm a little bit lower on Kamara this week, and again, not to keep talking about it, but I was on Harris football this morning, and we talked about it as well. Harris
Where
is
are
one of
you?
like the biggest Alvin Kamara truthers that I know, and he even is a little bit lower on Kamara this week. I think that we're starting to see Kendra Miller in this Darren Rizzi offense look really good last week, and I'm not going to sit here and say like bench Alvin Kamara, but if you're in a position where your team is this loaded, I don't think it's that crazy. I think that we might kind of see that evaluation process for Kendra Miller over these next few weeks. Now the Saints are out of contention, so I'm going to bench Lad out of this group, but wouldn't say you're crazy for benching Kamara.
No, I mean I've got Alvin Kamara at running back 12 this week, so I don't know where you have him, but
I've got him running back 13.
okay. All right. So yeah, we're pretty similar on that. I think I'm gonna lean with Wah on this and bench
Yeah, I
Lad.
think Lad is definitely who I'd bench. I'm just saying that I think Kamara, this is the first week where, I mean, even the fact that we have him at RB 12 and 13, like this is a guy who's been top five almost all season long in rankings every single week. I think everybody starts to have concerns about what a Jake Hayner led offense is
Right.
going to look like down the stretch here. I think it's totally reasonable to have concern about Alvin Kamara this week.
All right. Next question on here from Ivan. Ivan's one of my boys. He's been a fan since like before I was even at Football Guys,
He
and
was in the
he and I
listener league with us last year, wasn't
yeah,
he? Yeah.
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 Ivan's a good dude. Got to meet him in Panama. Great guy. He asks, boys, got a dilemma at quarterback. CJ Stroud has been disappointing, to put it nicely, but my backup is Matt Stafford tonight versus the Niners. Ugh, it's a 6-point passing touchdown league. Help your boy out.
I do have the Rams upsetting San Francisco tonight.
Mm.
I think the Rams or the 49ers have obviously been sputtering a little bit. I'd really be interested to see who's available on waivers in this league between these two because I'm very low on Stroud this week, and I've been pretty low on Stafford as well. Jameis Winston,
Yeah,
I've got
I would
ahead of
have.
both of them.
Yep,
So if you could
yep.
pick up Jameis Winston, I'd do that. But if Jameis Winston isn't available, Anthony Richardson, Herbert, I can't imagine they're available.
Drake May.
I'd yeah, Drake May. I'd go Stroud ahead of Stafford, but I mean it's my QB 17 and my QB 19. I'm pretty low on both of them this week.
QB 17 and QB 20 for me. I would also go Stroud there, but I think Ivan, the thing to look at here is who else is going to be on waivers. Is there a
Mhm.
Jameis, Anthony Richardson, Drake May? Dave, I'm going to ask this: Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Rodgers
No,
versus one of these guys? No, you're still not
no.
there. Okay, I
Mm-mm.
just had to ask because I have
Yeah,
Aaron Rodgers one spot below Stafford.
and he's coming off a good week. First 300-yard game in like 15 years.
15 years. I like that we just progressively keep making Aaron Rodgers older. All right, so yeah, I guess if you have to choose between those two, it's gonna be Stroud. If not, look for Jameis Winston or one of those other guys out there on waivers. Let's go to the next one on here. Pierre, oh, bonjour, Pierre, asks PPR league, Patrick Mahomes or Justin Herbert at the quarterback spot. And then he's got a second question, so let's answer this first one here: Mahomes or Herbert?
Mahomes at home, or I'm sorry, Herbert at home against Tampa Bay. I like that better than Mahomes on the road in Cleveland. I've
Yes.
got this whole kind of bunch of quarterbacks here: Sam Darnold, Brock Purdy, Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson, Baker Mayfield, Patrick Mahomes. It's weird. Like they're all names that we know well. They're all guys who have very high ceilings, but like just don't feel good about any of them this week. I feel like you've got your kind of top five in Allen, Hurts, Daniels, Lamar, and Burrow. And if you don't have one of those guys, I feel like the floor for every other quarterback is just 5 points.
What a time to be alive. Just looking at the rankings and seeing that my top 10 is littered with
But you got
Tua.
Bo Nix ahead of Herbert and Mahomes probably.
Yeah, it's Tua,
Mhm.
Sam Darnold, Bo Nix. I mean, Brock Purdy. You got
It's
Jared
gross.
Goff at quarterback 11, Baker Mayfield at 12. And then outside of that, you've got all the big names: Mahomes, Stroud, Aaron Rodgers. It's hilarious, honestly. That's where we're at. Welcome to the playoffs. All right, next question that Pierre had here also is he needs to start 2 out of these 4 players. So Josh Downs, DeAndre Swift, Travis Etienne, Braylon Allen. And I think just to start this one off, I
Downs
think
for
I'm
sure.
gonna go Downs and Allen out of those 4.
I don't feel good about Allen, man. It was a 50-50 split last week with him and Isaiah Davis, and I don't know how those touches are going to get split up. I know it's a nice matchup against Jacksonville, but 50-50 split backfield on one of the worst offenses in the league is something that's tough for me to feel good about. I understand it. The ceiling is definitely there, but I have DeAndre Swift ahead of Braylon Allen this week.
Okay, I've got Swift behind him. I've got Swift behind him. I think Travis Etienne is the guy we'll both agree is probably the worst
Yeah,
matchup out of this one.
the
Yeah,
ceiling's there. I mean, like I said, if they're
yeah,
trailing, he
it's
could end
Travis
up with
Etienne.
5 targets. Yeah, but I'm going Swift ahead of Allen, and then ETN behind them both.
Okay, so we're both in agreement here. Downs is a start out of these 4, and then hey, Pierre, make your choice here, man. Who do you love more, me or Dave? That's it. Next question. Jacob asks, guys, love the show. Jacob, we love you.
Can we go
Would
back
you start?
real quickly? One
Yeah.
reason I was trying to figure out why I'm a little bit higher on DeAndre Swift this week because I haven't been so much.
Mhm.
Um, we know the Minnesota Vikings blitz a ton, and the best way to beat the blitz is with short passes to running backs. So I think that's kind of why I'm a little bit higher on Swift this week is just knowing that when they face off against Minnesota, we could see a lot of checkdowns of Swift. I think that gives him, both a higher floor and ceiling on the week.
We could, and that was sort of the saving grace last time
Right.
that Swift played against Minnesota, where he
Right.
caught 3 passes. But it's also just it's been really rough for him on the ground over the last
Mhm.
3 weeks. Remember, he was the guy I
Oh,
said that you
trust
could
me,
drop.
I think he's
I
a
know you know.
terrible running back. You're preaching to the choir here. I think he
I know.
sucks.
Yeah, I know you know. But he's been essentially he's not even a top 30 running back over the last 3 weeks here. So
Yeah.
it's hard. Like I feel like the upside just isn't there anymore. All right, let's go back to Jacob's question here. He asks, "Would you start Tucker Kraft in a half PPR and half point per first down league, or either one of Josh Palmer or Michael Wilson?" So Kraft,
I'm going
Palmer,
Kraft.
Wilson.
Kraft
Yeah,
for sure, yeah, and Josh Palmer, like, we keep getting
it's
duped
fine.
into it. Yeah, we know the opportunity has been there so many times throughout his career, and it's just like every time the opportunity's there, we get like a wide receiver 3 week.
Exactly.
Yeah,
He's fine. I think
yeah,
he and Wilson are both just fine. I think if you want touchdown upside, it's Tucker Kraft at this
yeah,
point.
for sure.
Yeah. All right. Next question on here from Diex. Yep, sure. On Twitter here, asking Malik Neighbors, DeAndre Hopkins, Adam Thielen. Go. Let's just assume half PPR.
Very easily Malik Neighbors for me. I have him, and I'm high on Thielen this week. I've got Thielen as my wide receiver 27. But I don't know, man. Maybe I'm an idiot for going back to the well with Tommy Cutlett throwing the ball here. But you look at this matchup. Malik Neighbors going up against Baltimore. Baltimore's secondary has
Definitely.
not been good. They are
Yeah.
going to be trailing. Malik Neighbors is still leading the league with a 34% target share. It might not be pretty, but the path to 12 or 15 targets is there, and it's Malik Neighbors. All he needs to do is break one tackle, and it's off to the races. So I think the upside is still there for Neighbors. I do love me some Adam Thielen this week, but I got Neighbors a few spots ahead of him.
Yeah, I've got Malik Neighbors at wide receiver 21 and Adam Thielen at wide receiver 25. So they're pretty close for me, but I'm gonna go Neighbors on that one as well. DeAndre Hopkins is my wide receiver 36. Like I'm
Yeah,
pretty
I've
low.
got Hopkins 34, so quite a few spots below. I'm worried about that, man. December road game in Cleveland. It's not that I think Mahomes is bad or anything like that, but that's a tough environment to go into.
Yeah, not excited. That could be one of those where we're seeing Cleveland play spoiler to the Chiefs. I don't know,
Very high
but
on Pacheco this week, I'll say that.
okay, all right. I see you. Last two questions here from El Real Chew is asking Debo Samuel or Mark Andrews. Back in week one, this would have been just like a nuts question. We would have been like, start them both.
Mm.
And now I'm kind of just like, bench them both.
Yeah, I'm going Mark Andrews here. Mark Andrews has been scoring a lot. If Isaac
Oh,
Guerrero was out, I'd
it's a
probably go
half tight
Debo.
end half tight end premium. So I think that also swings it even further.
Easily Andrews then. I might
Yeah.
go Debo if Guerrero was out. I think Debo would have seen a lot of backfield usage if Guerrero was out, but with him playing tonight, I'll go with Andrews.
So Garindo is sorry. Just is that confirmed? Garindo is playing tonight.
If you think that Adam Schefter is a credible source, yes.
Well, you didn't have to say it like that. I just haven't seen it yet. I wasn't
No,
on
he came out this morning. He said the plan is for Isaac Guerrero to play. He
the
logged a limited
plan.
practice yesterday, felt good after his limited practice, woke up today and felt good, and they said that the plan is for him to play tonight. Of course, the re-injury risk for this type of injury is very high. So let's have that discussion right now because we haven't really talked. He's playing tonight.
I'm not playing him.
You're not playing him?
I'm not playing him.
I've
I
got him as
can't. You
my
can't take a zero. You
I've got
can't
him as
take a
my
zero. You
RB12.
can't take a single
Won't be a
digit game.
zero. He could pick up like 2 yards and you can take a point two.
Okay.
I don't know,
Okay.
man. I get it. Like I
I don't. I
understand the
don't.
trepidation.
I don't like it at this time of year. We've seen it before. X player plans to play. X player plans to see how he feels, especially with it being a Thursday. I mean, I get it if you don't have any better options, but
So if it was a full week of practice and a clean bill of health, Guerrero would be inside my top 10
I
with
like
the
you called him
re
Isaiah Garindo because he's
yeah,
just essentially just
yeah,
diet Isaiah
same guy.
Pacheco. Yeah.
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 Um he'd be inside my top 10 with a full week of practice and a clean bill of health and not on the short week, but I'm still starting it, man. It's a good matchup against LA. They've been pretty susceptible to the run this year. I've got him as my RB12 this week. Got him ahead of Alvin Kamara, Zach
Oh,
Charbonnet, James Conner, James Cook. The ceiling is just so high. I mean, like we saw him put up a huge game last week, and that was with him missing the fourth quarter. And he would have had another touchdown if he didn't get hurt last week. And I think that's the upside with a guy like Arendo is he could have 150 yards and 3 touchdowns. Of course, the downside though is that he goes out, cuts once, and is like, nope, that doesn't feel good. I'm going to go to the bench.
I'm oof.
He
I'm gonna have to
downplayed
sit
the
on this.
injury quite a bit. I mean, he said the day after the injury, he's like, "It's no big deal." Took a couple days off of practice yesterday. Now says he's good to go. I like to think he's going to be fine.
I mean, he also said the same day that he got the injury that it was just precautionary. And then Kyle Shanahan was like, "Yeah, he definitely could not practice today. It could not practice on Tuesday." I I'm gonna have to take some time to sit on this and
Yeah,
think about it and keep doing the research and keep looking because my first initial gut instinct is absolutely not. I do not want to throw this guy into my lineup if I have better options. But yeah, anyways, the actual question was Debo or Andrews. Andrews here for sure. Last question on here from Barely Fantasy. It's got a cute little bear in their avatar. Well, it's funny. They ask with Isaac Garindo aching, who's the new league winner? So let's assume here Isaac Garindo is out of the picture. Dave, is there a player that you look at and say, man, this is a league winner? I guess there's not really context to this. I don't think it's necessarily a player you're going to grab off the waiver wire, but maybe someone that fantasy managers already have on their roster.
Sincere McCormick. I mean,
Yeah.
like he's the guy who should see touches down the stretch here, but I don't think this is a year where we have like a certified league winner that you're picking up off the playoffs. I think if Garendo's healthy, it's probably him, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean it's essentially I think it's any one of these running backs that are being afforded more opportunity here. I mean, even depending on what happens with Ken Walker, it could be Zach Charbonnet that ends up being one of those league winners. Rico Dowdle's having himself a hot streak right now. We talked about Adam Thielen weeks ago, and here he is having a phenomenal stretch down here in the fantasy playoffs. Tyrone Tracy is another guy where the Giants really don't have much else going on, and his role just continues to grow. So I think if I had to pick one of those names that really fit the bill, Dave, it's exactly who you said, right off the jump here. Sincere McCormick is the guy who could be the league winner.
We called Tyrone Tracy a league winner back in August, so
Yeah.
I want to keep beating that drum for the last 4 months. But Tyrone Tracy, man, excited to see him playing well.
Yep. Oh, it's just delightful to see players
I know.
play well this time of year. December's magical.
Yeah.
Fantasy playoffs are magical.
There's something about like that feeling too, like where you and I planted big flags on Tyrone Tracy, and then the season starts, and Devin Singletary's just going out there and getting like a 90% opportunity share, and it's like and you feel terrible about it. And then like 3 weeks later, Tyrone Tracy starts getting some touches, and it's like, wow, he looks good. And then that workload rose, and then before you know it, he's just a workhorse there, and it's like, worked out. It only took about a month to get there. It's a good feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Fantasy playoffs. I have a feeling it's gonna be a lot of heartbreak this weekend, and it's going to be a very angsty show next week. But hopefully, if you've been listening to this show, and if you've been watching us on YouTube, we have gotten you to your fantasy playoffs, and we're going to get you through this week onto week 16. Hopefully, honestly, you're not even watching this because you had a round one bye. That's got to be it. That's got to be it. And so we're going to see everybody again next week. Dave, of course, is going to be back on the audio side on Apple and Spotify with Jeff Bell going over the week's news and injury updates. Sunday morning, we'll have the Sunday morning live crew helping you out with your start sit questions. That's going to be Joey Wright, Jagger May, Jeff Bell, Adam Hutchison, the whole crew there. And then Dave and I are back again next week helping you guys with those, really second to last week of waivers that we're going to have this fantasy season. So it's going to be a good one, Dave. We're almost done, man. We're almost out of the woods here. Fantasy football. It's been a good ride.
Yeah, it's going by quick, man. Before we know it, just this week, 2 weeks left, and then playoffs are here, like real playoffs.
They grow up so fast, man. But all good things must come to an end.
What are we gonna be doing? A Bears fan and a Dolphins fan? How are we going to enjoy the playoffs this year?
The same way I do every year, watching other teams win.
From the outside looking in, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can make some money on some prop bets or something.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I'm just getting totally
you're
off the rails here. But I was going to say, as a Bears fan, I always try to have like a number 2 team. Like every single year at the beginning of the season, I say like, this is my number 2 team, because if I just put all of my emotional investment in the Bears, it never ends well. So
you could say
Ravens.
I was gonna say, you could say the Bears are already a number 2 team.
Go Ravens.
Yeah. Well, take a big number 2. Dave and I will see you guys again next week. As always, I want to thank you guys for watching and listening all the way through. We'll see you next time. Adios.